Hello and welcome to Unstress. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Now, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am recording this podcast, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As I have often said, and I don't mind repeating it, we have much to learn from our Indigenous people about connection and respect, about a way of approaching a problem, starting from a position of respect, then to connect with the parties involved, to reflect on what we have learnt, and then finally to direct. We've got a lot to learn. Well, I always think it's wonderful when health practitioners collaborate for the well-being of their patients. I mean, what a wonderful idea, putting egos aside and just being willing to learn from each other and get a great result for the person who you are treating. Well, my guest today is Dr. Jalal Khan. Dr. Jalal is a quantum biologist and a dentist, an oral physician. He practices in North Sydney, in Sydney, and is a clinic called the Quantum Kid. And his collaborator is a cranial osteopath and breathing retraining specialist, Cole Clayton. And Cole is based in Byron Bay in northern New South Wales, but together they spend about a week in Jalal's practice in Sydney, collaborating on patients and learning from each other, and the patient is the benefit. I think it's a wonderful conversation about a whole range of things. It's a conversation about quantum biology. It's a conversation about the complexity of our head, the cranium, which carries our brain. It's a conversation about the importance of when your lower jaw and upper jaw come together, the effect that has on structure. It's a conversation about breathing. It's a conversation about a whole range of things. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Dr. Jalal Khan and Cole Clayton. Welcome back, Jalal, and welcome to the show, Cole.
Thank you, Dr. Ron.
Good to be back, Ron.
Yes, well, Jalal, our last show was so well received and piqued so many people's interest. But for those that may have missed it, and I don't think you can hear this often enough, what is quantum biology and why is a dentist interested in that?
So, Ron, quantum biology is an appreciation of the fact that the biology that occurs inside of our body is underpinned by biochemistry, and that biochemistry itself is underpinned by physics. And the physics that I'm talking about is not Newtonian physics, but it's actually quantum physics. So it's not classical physics. And quantum physics is a bit of a scary place. It's a bit of a woo-woo type of name. And the word quantum itself is something that's hard to define, but it's really understanding what is happening at the smallest scales inside of our cells. And that I'm talking about electrons and protons and how they are interacting with light. So that's what quantum biology is in a nutshell. Why is a dentist interested in that? I guess I've come to learn through all of my research about how the body actually works that we are a non-linear open system. And so what I mean by that is that we are actually always exposing ourselves to the environment using our surfaces. And the three most common surfaces that come to mind are the eyes, the skin, and the gut. But there is, of course, the fourth surface, which is also very important, and that is the respiratory system and the way that we breathe and the air that we breathe in. And so we are sensing environmental cues from the environment using these surfaces, and our body actually amplifies the environmental cues that we receive. So it's not like a linear system where 1 + 1 = 2. So a nice example of that is one photon of light actually, once it hits our retina, gets amplified 1,000,000-fold. So it's this non-linear nature of the way that our body works. And so when I came to appreciate that about how our body works, I started to think about the mouth. And we're all taught in dental school that about 38 to 40% of the brain receives sensory information from this area of the face, the mouth and the tongue and the teeth and the way the teeth come together and the muscles and the TMJ, etc. So if 38% of the brain is receiving information from this part of the face, could this face not have a seriously non-linear impact on the way our body works? And so it took a lot of unlearning and then a bit more relearning to really get to the bottom of this cranial dental complex. And I definitely acknowledge that Cole was absolutely critical in rewiring the way that I thought about the mouth, and something that I'm forever grateful, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into what it's all about today.
Yeah, well, look, we're going to come back and talk more about a lot of what you've already raised there. But to you, Cole, people may not be familiar with what a cranial osteopath is, and I'm wondering if you could share with us that as well.
A lot of people even don't know what an osteopath is.
Well, let's start with an osteopath, because people are familiar with chiro, physio, osteopath and not sure what the differences are. But tell us firstly about osteopathy, and then let's hone in on the cranial
side. One of the big three, isn't it? Physio, chiro, osteo, and what's the difference? So osteopathy itself originated from a medical doctor, A.T. Still, back in the late 1800s. He got a bit disillusioned with the system after he lost a couple of kids, tragically. And he just wanted to develop something better. And he came up with what he called the science of osteopathy. So what he was really looking at is how does, everyone, we've heard of this before, but like form following function, and how do those two interact is really the basis, like at a deep, deep level. And then he was somewhat of a mystic. He sort of spoke in riddles and not riddles, but more metaphors. So he used to talk about say the ears being the chimney, so the earwax was like the chimney sort, he'd speak like that, and he'd talk about the forests of X, Y, and Z. You have to really, you can study his work very deeply. And so then he had a student, and the student was called William Garner Sutherland, and the story goes, we're all taught this as cranial osteopaths, those of us that kind of come from this line. So to step back, osteopathy today is essentially an allied health manual therapy. But there's an ongoing joke, what's the definition of osteopathy? And the answer is disagreement. So we're a bunch of like nerds basically that sit there and try and learn anatomy to the nth degree and then argue about it, and argue about what works and what doesn't work, and that we're right and everyone else is wrong and that sort of stuff. So we disagree a lot of things, but we're a friendly bunch typically. But there's a bit of a split between what we'd call the structural osteopaths and the cranial osteopaths. So as structural osteopaths are the ones that will deal with, facet joints and myofascial release and muscle hypertonicity and stuff like that. And there's cranial guys, we sort of just sit in small rooms, and like I don't even really have a sign here, and people wander past trying to find me. But I sit and do cranial osteopathy. So that arose from this guy, Sutherland, who happened to be in a hallway, and he saw a skull, an actual human skull that was disarticulated, so broken apart. And story goes, he had a voice. He called it his Tom Fool moment. He had a voice that came into his head literally and said, beveled like the gills of a fish and built for an articular respiratory motion. And he was like, no, the skull doesn't move. That's nonsense. And he spent about 30 years trying to disprove that voice. All right. So osteopathy, probably out of all of them, has a bit more sort of mystery around it. Right. And he spent a lot of time doing things with football helmets, the old leather football helmets they had in the US, and baseball gloves and bits of string, and he'd lock up different sutures and feel the effects on his body. So he'd go and practice on his patients and figure out, I wonder if I could reproduce that at home. And his wife found him passed out a couple of times upstairs, like not breathing and stuff. And you do these experiments and you figured out the structure and function of the cranium, basically. And
because, Cole, I think for our listener, just to make it, they may not be as aware of this, but in traditional medicine, it's believed that above a certain age, quite a young age, the sutures, let's take a step even further back from that. The skull is made up of, I forget how many bones. And I'm not going to put 22 bones. There we go. So the skull is made up of 22 separate bones. The lower jaw is made up of one. So there's quite a lot going on in the skull. Well, we could argue about that one, okay. But at least the skull is made up of all of these bones, and it's believed in traditional medicine that those sutures close up, the things that join those bones together, and there's no movement in the skull.
Yeah.
Is that a fair? Would you want to add to that? Or,
well, see, that's a pretty largely debated topic, but without.
But that's traditional.
Traditionally,
that is how it's.
If you look at some of the studies by NASA, for example, where they take astronauts into space where the pressures are different, they've actually studied the movement of these sutures and the movement of the bones. Yep. And found that there's pliability. If you watch UFC, which I like to do, and you watch a knockout in slow motion, you will see the face go like that. So whether they move, they don't move like a synovial joint, Whether they move, whether there's a warp, whether there's a tensegrity there, whether it's 10 microns or 100 microns or whatever it is of movement, that's where the debate is. But even some of your staunch medical people I've had discussions with will admit that there's some kind of warping that goes on in there. So do they actually move? Me, they absorb force. So if I watch UFC, bang, you'll see the skull really disfigure, but then when they're lying on the canvas unconscious, that hasn't stayed that way. So there's a strength, an inherent tensegrity strength that's given to the system to accommodate what Jalal was talking about, because you can break your jaw and still survive. You can still manage to get fluid in and liquid in. It's a very accommodative system, and so that you can argue, do they move? I think there's something there. I can't tell you exactly, but I can feel it. I can feel it when it changes, and that's the whole mechanism of craniosacral or cranial osteopathy, or what's technically called osteopathy in the cranial field, that Sutherland taught. Because after 30 years of sitting in a room experimenting, osteopaths said, "Hey, Will, can you teach us this?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know if I'm ready." And then he spent the last part of his life literally touring the States with big charts and teaching cranial osteopathy. Yeah.
But that is another feature of this controversy, if you like, and it's not really controversial, but it's the semantics that surrounds the word move.
Yeah.
Like when I lift my arm up, that's a clear movement. But when we're talking about movement of cranial bones, that's where the semantics comes in. And it may be tension, it may be stresses, it may be strains, but it's significant. And that's basically what you're picking up when you're
I like to call it warping. So I think there's a warping of the bone. Okay. I think that the joints allow it. And I think the brain moves. Like I'm pretty sure the brain moves just like all our other viscera. And so it has to accommodate that movement to some degree to allow cerebral spinal fluid to pump in and out. So there's a few principles of cranial osteopathy or assumptions that we make, and that's one of them, that there's an inherent motility to the cerebral spinal fluid. It has its own movement. Yeah, that's one of the five.
The other thing.
Sorry, go on, Jalal.
The other thing I would add to it is that I agree with the osteopaths. Obviously, that's why I'm here, but there has to be some sort of motion or motility or warping of the bones, because otherwise Mother Nature or the Creator would have just made the skull as one bone. And there's a reason that there's 22. There's a reason that there's 14 in the face and 8 in the skull, because they're all doing different things at different times. And so I think it's important to appreciate that nature doesn't necessarily make mistakes. There's a reason things are formed the way that they are.
So, I mean, the idea of the cranium and the jaw, which I think we can all agree as part of the human head, there's no controversy there, and they are connected by teeth. But I guess the question comes, how did you guys meet and decide that you needed to be working together?
Yeah, so in short, we had a patient that was seeing both of us. I was making dental appliances for her, and Cole was performing the cranial osteopathy for her. She was a resident of Byron Bay, so she travelled down to Sydney to work with me and then go back up to Cole and have her cranial response assessed by Cole. And what I mean by cranial response is how was her head and those bones that we've just been talking about, how were they responding to a new oral appliance in her mouth? And so Cole was sensing that sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. So he got in touch. To be fair, I ignored the email for a little while. But
your dental training kicking in there,
Jalal. That's it. But eventually we got talking, and very quickly we realized that our approaches, our values were seriously aligned. And we were both open-minded and open-hearted to learn more about each other's fields and really do our best to work together to deliver the best for our patients. And so that meant, me as a dentist allowing someone else to look inside the mouth. And that's hard for dentists, as I'm sure you can appreciate, Ron. We're trained to be very territorial. So very quickly, Cole and I realized that we both had the same values, the same goals for our patients, and things really, really aligned. And we knew we had to work together. And so we just trialed it in July this year, and things just went really, really smoothly. It felt like we've been working together for years, and we were like, okay, we know we can do this. So we sat down and really nutted out more and more about how cranial osteopathy and dentistry could look going forward, and some of the appliances that we could use, and how we could monitor the development of our patients with those appliances in their mouth. And it's been absolutely incredible. It's been a revelation for me as a dentist. Now that I know what I know, I just think, how is this not taught in dental schools? How is it so foreign to think that the jaws are connected to the head? We have an epidemic of dentists who are just completely focused on teeth, and they're not thinking big picture, and they're doing their patients a disservice. And I think that's something that Cole and I are passionate about. It's not just perfecting the paradigm of care that we want to deliver, but then also trying to see if we can unite dentistry and osteopathy and get dentists to realize that they are osteopaths. They're just working on different bones. And I would go as far as to say that every tooth is a bone in itself. And when we move those teeth without respecting the rest of the body, there's far-reaching non-linear implications on the rest of the body.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think histology was one of my favourite subjects at university. It sounds weird to even say that.
It definitely does.
The study of cells, and it's interesting to note that what keeps the bones together in the skull are what's called, I think, Sharpey's fibres.
Yes.
And what keeps teeth attached to the jawbone are Sharpey's fibres.
That's right.
So your comment that every tooth is practically like a bone is anatomically, histologically, on a microscopic level, absolutely, probably quite accurate. To defend the dentists, though, I say, it's a really, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, Jalal, but it's a very, very intense profession, dealing with patients that are awake, trying to swallow and breathe, and you're trying to stay calm as a dentist, and you've got a lot to focus on. So, taking a step back and saying, hey, wait on, this mouth is connected to a whole body is, sometimes probably a good thing to do every single day as an affirmation, really, isn't it? But you mentioned, Jalal, a couple of times the word appliance, and I certainly know what that means, but I wondered if you might just give our listener an appliance. What is an appliance? What is a dental appliance? And are all dental appliances the same?
That's a really great question. So a dental appliance is essentially a device which someone wears in their mouth. Most of the time, appliances are made for nighttime wear while people are sleeping, but there are the odd daytime appliances as well. And the goal of the appliances could be, there's multiple goals. It really depends on the way the appliance is designed and what its purpose is. Sometimes it's to straighten teeth. Sometimes it's to make a jaw bigger. Sometimes it's to help reposition a lower jaw. Regardless, the goal is always a well-meaning goal. But what I've come to appreciate is that when patients are wearing any sort of dental appliance, whether it's a stock standard, prefabricated appliance, whether it's a custom-made appliance, the impact that it has on the cranial rhythms and the way that those bones move or warp is quite profound. And what I've discovered in working with Cole is that whenever I place a dental appliance in someone's mouth, there is instant biofeedback that is provided to Cole via the cranial rhythm. And so I kind of almost have a blanket rule now in my clinic, which is that I don't deliver any sort of dental appliance unless that patient's head is being felt and palpated by a cranial osteopath such as Cole. So, although Cole's the only one I work with at the moment, but yeah, and the reason is because I don't want to hurt the patient. And what we found is some appliances which are thought to have been working quite well have been actually locking up the base of the cranium, for instance. And so some small adjustments or in the appliance or some cranial work done by Cole is actually enough to release the cranium and get the appliance to work nicely with the cranium. So it's all about this synergy of the appliance helping with any cranial strains and relieving of cranial strains, helping the body work with the appliance. And so that reciprocal relationship is absolutely critical in the way that we are using appliances.
Well, I got to say that having used such dental appliances for almost all of my professional career, which goes back over 40 years, to have had a cranial osteopath sitting next to me to check my appliances would just be a dream. I mean, I just think it really is. It's like getting a second opinion, but a more holistic one. Well, there is actually three opinions you get. One is the dentist delivering, the other is the patient receiving, and they don't really know, not straight away anyway.
They do.
But the third, sometimes they do, it's true. But to have the cranial osteopath there to say, actually, what you've just put in the mouth has had this effect, you go, oh my God.
100%. And yeah. The best part is that it's not really me or Cole that's making the decision. It's actually the patient and their response. And so the body has this innate intelligence to use forces that are natural, that are physiological, that are not mechanical. And so when you honor that innate intelligence in the way that you work, it ensures that me as a dentist, I can't hurt anybody with any of the appliances. I can't over adjust an appliance because Cole's always there to sense that cranial rhythm and tell me when to stop. So yeah, it's super, super exciting, and it's an absolute thrill and honor for me to have Cole working alongside me.
And I think the other thing too is that many practitioners will have their favorite appliance or two, and that's it. That is for everybody. We'll get one or two of those appliances. But this is so nuanced and so individual.
The other thing it does for the patient, Ron, is it saves them a heap of hassle. So imagine you've got a kid and they come and see Jalal over at North Sydney, and let's say I was somewhere in Sydney as well, so Jalal gives them the appliance, or let's say that patient from Byron, Jalal gives her the appliance, she comes up here, she says, oh, he adjusted it. And then I check her and I go, oh, yeah, he did, but it's still not quite right. And you like the left part of your neck or whatever it is. Like we spent a good, 40 minutes with that patient brainstorming until we got it right. And now she's just like, she's so happy. But like to do that for the patient going between Jalal's office and my office and me typing an email to Jalal and him not replying, and then, it's just like where for the patient's benefit, they come in, they go, wow, these guys are like, both of us are like laser point focused on this case, and how can we best serve that person. That makes all the difference to the patient. So it saves them. Imagine that if you've got a kid and you're running around like this, my office, no, that's not the right size, back to Jalal, adjust this, please, Jalal, back to mine. No, that could take 4 weeks, whereas this way it takes us, 4 minutes.
Yeah. Now you guys are working together, and I know you've called the clinic, the Quantum Kid Clinic, or it was at one iteration, and I know, I felt kind of left out there because I feel I've always thought of myself as a little kid. Who is the target here? Who can benefit from this kind of approach?
We've got 2 age brackets that we're looking to target. As the name suggests, the Quantum Kid, there is a focus on children that are about 3.5 to 4 years old and upwards to 16, 17 years old. And there's different appliances that we use based on age, based on their how they are presenting, what are their clinical needs, what are their functional and form needs. But then we also do treat quite a few adults with a different paradigm where we start to loop in a bit of kinesiology, a bit of muscle testing, and understanding a bit more about body types and tailoring treatment to each person's body type. So there's a wide range of ages that we can treat. So we'd probably say 4 years plus up till 1 year ago for you, Ron. So maybe what's that?
No, you've got to go beyond that. You've got to go beyond that. But I mean, we're talking, when you start to include me, Jalal, you are including adults. So that's good. At least notionally, we are including adults. No, it's important. I know that. Listen, I know breathing is central to life, but it's also central to both your approaches. Well, what are the common messages, that we should be aware of when it comes to breathing? I mean, a lot of people just think, I'm alive, I'm breathing. What more is there to breathing than that?
Well, there's a paradigm or a scale of that. I remember talking to a GP about this once, and I was running a breathing workshop and he happened to be there, and he said, well, this is great because they are looking at a child that's sick or a child that's not sick. Right. So when you're sick, you've got asthma, let's say, or you think you suspected asthma, or you're wheezing, or whatever that is. And okay, that child's now in that category of sickness. We have to make an intervention. But what is it that predisposed that child to that diagnosis? That's what he's sort of had a paradigm shift in and gone, wow, like we can probably actually pick those kids up before they end up sick. Yeah. So in cranial osteopathy, we have 2 systems: a primary respiratory mechanism, which you could argue, which osteopaths do, that's not a good name. Fair enough. It's what's the name we have for it, which is the ebb and flow of the cerebral spinal fluid up and down the spine between the brain and the spinal cord itself. And then we have what we call, how's this, Ron? We call it secondary respiration is breathing. So
I can see why osteopaths are arguing.
Exactly, we're a strange crew, I tell you. But secondary respiration is a window, right? So I can have a look at a child or an adult, but let's say in this case a child, and quickly pick up 3 or 4 key things, which Jalal now does as well because he's seen me do it enough times, and he's like, he writes the notes for me and I write the notes for him. So I'm learning to count teeth and he's learning about sternocostal angles and stuff. So there's a few key things we can look at in a child and a few key clues we can look at to see whether or not they are actually having breathing function ideal. And of course, Jalal will tell you all about the quantum nature of cellular respiration and oxygen uptake and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you can't run your mitochondria or energy factories in your cell without correct oxygen uptake, and correct oxygen uptake requires correct breathing. So it requires the correct structure around breathing. It requires the correct biochemical processes, let's say respiratory physiology, and it also is linked to our limbic system, our emotional system. So good health is like pivoted off good breathing. So being able to pick that up in a kid and have a quick scan, find the problem, as A.T. Still sort of was coined to say, which actually means something different, but he said, find it, fix it, leave it alone. So if we can find those things, fix them pretty easily and pretty quickly, which is what we do in our approach, then actually it's kind of like we turn the keys to let the breathing system function well, rather than us trying to fix breathing, because in a child, the self-healing mechanism is just inherent. So if you can find the right keys, just change a couple of things, the body just goes, oh, yeah, and it reverts to, proper breathing function. And all of a sudden, they're getting oxygen uptake, better sleep, and they've got more energy. They're not fussing. They're concentrating better. Teachers are saying, what the heck have you done with Ron? Because he's concentrating in class now, He's really into his histology. He wasn't before. So, that's.
But remind our listener, because I know any regular listener to my program will be able to list off what ideal breathing is. They'll probably be able to give a course in it. But just remind our listener what the difference is. What is ideal breathing?
Yeah, well, ideal breathing is a relationship with the atmosphere. Okay. So, fish in water, they don't know they're in water, but they're in water. So we're like that in the air, in the atmosphere. So there's quite a lot of pressure on our bodies from the atmosphere, from air. And what happens is when you're first born, you take a big breath. And then your second sort of part of breathing is a big scream. Right. And so what happens on that big breath is we inflate the lungs. What happens on the big scream is we deflate the lungs. And then that sets up a pressure differential. So it's the first exposure to this atmosphere for the baby, right? In utero, the lungs are just little buds. They're not sprung open. And oxygen's coming from elsewhere. But bang, that opens up, and then bang, it closes down, right? And when it's closed down, you've then got a negative pressure inside the lung. And so the next thing is to fill that, because that happens naturally, because that is now a vacuum here. And so there's more pressure in the atmosphere, less pressure here. And so the air has to go that way. It's physics. It has to go that way. And then it fills up that lung, and then there's more pressure in the lung. So it has to go back that way, right? So optimal breathing is just a facilitation of that pressure differential. That's all it is.
Well, what's dysfunctional breathing? Because the air's still getting in and out, isn't it?
It is, but what happens is that process becomes disturbed for various reasons. So what happens is a compensation to try and maintain a relationship with that pressure differential, yeah? And so rather than saying, I'd say it like this, Ron, rather than saying, mouth breathing is dysfunctional breathing, for some children in some circumstances, it's completely functional. It's a functional compensation. It's not ideal. It's not going to maximize oxygen uptake, but in some cases, the body's doing that for a reason. So you can come and take the mouth shut and force it, but that's actually working against what that person's body's wanting to do. So what we want to do is kind of go, okay, what can I find along the chain? What's the nature of the position of the rib cage? Is it super narrow, or is it become wide? And that gives us an idea of where the diaphragm is. And if the diaphragm's stuck up here or it's stuck down there, we change the relationship of that pressure differential. So can I change the rib cage tension? Can I change the diaphragm tension? And what will that do? And oftentimes that's often enough. Or what is it that's blocking the nose? Is it a lymphatic issue? Is it a drainage issue? Is it a intraoral volume issue? Is it a tongue issue? Is it a shaping an orthopedic issue from tongue or dummy? I mean, you've seen this a million times in practice, so you know what I mean. But those are the things that create these structural, biochemical, or neurophysical compensations that then the body has to adjust for to keep that airflow happening. Obviously, that's really important. But to me, they're windows into opportunities to heal the body rather than looking for the dysfunction and trying to fix it. Yeah.
Okay. Jalal, did you want to add anything to that?
I think one of the key points that Cole's raised there is that word functional compensation, because mouth breathing, for instance, is like a buzzword. Everybody's worried about mouth breathing and we're focusing on mouth taping, etc. And I, in the past as well, have been an advocate for mouth taping until I thought about it a bit more and worked more with Cole. And we tend to think that once there's a compensation, we've just got to fix it with a Band-Aid approach. And mouth tape is literally a Band-Aid over the mouth to close the mouth. But the body's needing to do that for a reason, and the body's intelligence is opening the mouth in order to allow the person to continue to breathe. So it's very similar, mouth taping, I would say, to orthodontics. And this is where I start to get a bit controversial, because the body, when we have misaligned teeth, the body has actually decided where those teeth need to go. This tooth needs to be a bit forward. This tooth needs to be a bit rotated. The lower jaw needs to be a bit protruded. The upper jaw needs to be a little bit narrow. Like, the body is actually, in some ways, decided that that's the malocclusion, that's the orthodontic arrangement that works best for that person. It's a compensation, but it's functional. And so what we do as a profession is we take that functional misalignment of teeth and we move it into a dysfunctional alignment. Now it's straight and the patients love the smile, the dentist loves the smile, the photos look great, chuck on a bit of whitening afterwards and it's all hunky-dory. But the body's like, as we're doing the braces or the Invisalign, the body's like, no, don't move those teeth there because I needed them there. And that's the problem that we are creating for patients, because now what happens is, I know, and this is from my own clinical experience, the teeth are the closure of the electrical circuit inside of our bodies. When our teeth come together, that closes the circuit. That's why all teeth are on a meridian and all teeth are connected to some sort of adrenal gland or endocrine gland or tissue or organ, etc. So if the teeth are closing the electrical circuit, we have a situation where once we straighten them, we are actually locking that person into all of their functional compensations in other parts of the body. One shoulder down, maybe the temporal bone's externally rotated, maybe there's a bit of a hip problem, etc. And so we lock them into those strains, which they then go to manual therapists for in order to have them straightened out. And a physiotherapist or a chiro might release a muscle or release some structure in the body, and the patient will feel better. But then with their straightened teeth in a misaligned body, they're going to go and have their next meal, and they're going to snap or click back into all of the strains that they were just adjusted out of. So the rewiring of the paradigm is an understanding that all of these compensations, whilst they may not look great, while they may be misaligned teeth, open mouth breathing, it doesn't look great, but it's functional. And what we're trying to do is correct the compensations as a whole unit. So we are not just straightening teeth, but we are straightening the head, we are straightening the body at the same time. That's what we do in the Quantum Kid Clinic. It's a toes to nose approach. We start at the feet, we work our way up, so that once we get to the top, all of the things that are underneath have already been straightened out. And so then we are actually building a system inside of that person where everything is working cohesively as one. And there is what I like to call quantum coherence. This is where we take it back to quantum biology now, because all of the fascia inside of the body, which is the quantum communication highway, where one organ talks to another about what's going on the left-hand side of the body to the right-hand side of the body. That's what fascia does. It's a tensegrity system, but it is also a communication system. If you have this coherent fascial system inside of your body, because there's been a toes to nose approach in the way that that person has been treated, then you have optimal health, optimal breathing, optimal function, optimal sleep, optimal drainage of the lymph from the brain, and, you know, brain fog starts to dissipate. And I guess we can probably start to talk about some of the symptoms as well. But really, that's the approach that that we bring to the table, and we know from what we've done so far that this works. We know that it is a big leap forward. Could take a few years for it to take hold with other clinicians, but the mothers, the fathers, the children, they're sensing the changes, they're feeling the changes, and they're absolutely loving it, and it's so rewarding for Cole and I.
What about where, you've said form follows function, and if, well, we have breathing, I shouldn't really use the word dysfunctional breathing, but let's use it just for the sake of it, that it's less than optimal breathing. The reason for that could be many and varied. For example, mold in the room, in the house, dust mites, food, not allergies, although that's pretty obvious. Someone eats something and they immediately have an allergic response, immediately break out into hives or go into anaphylactic shock. But there's food sensitivities which affect airway. So coming at it from a non-structural perspective, and I'm guessing this is perhaps where quantumly, you're improving a person's adaptation here. But how does environmental and nutritional triggers to bring dysfunctional breathing, in inverted commas, how do we deal with that?
It's a great question, because it's definitely real, and there's so many parents who are struggling with children that have food sensitivities, intolerances. We see it every day. The way that we approach it is, Cole and I both have quite a strong and firm understanding of nutrition, particularly from a quantum angle, where we are understanding concepts like deuterium, we're understanding the food sensitivities, the fact that we should be eating seasonal and local for a reason, because it's marrying up nicely with the light cues that the child should be receiving if they're in nature. All of these small basic things can play a role. Plus, this is where, as well, Cole's skills with kinesiology come into play, because sometimes we can really use kinesiology to nut out what is the exact food or class of food which is causing the sensitivity for a child. Could it be eggs? We've had that in some instances. Even though we know that pastured eggs are healthy, there are some children that just don't gel well with eggs at the moment. And so it's using all of these modalities which Cole and I together have to create kind of this quantum paradigm, which is why we call it the Quantum Kid, because there's just so many ways that we can work together and with the parents to help the children.
This coming back to one of the first questions about what is quantum biology, because this production of energy, actually, let me just take a step further back, because you've mentioned, Cole, that there are two forms of respiration: primary respiration, which is the movement of cerebrospinal fluid through the body. And just to remind our listener, the brain and the spinal cord sit in a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, and there's a rhythm that goes with that. That's primary respiration according to osteopaths. And secondary respiration is the inhalation of air and the whole breathing. Would the third respiration, in fact, one would argue maybe it's the primary respiration, is what's going on in each and every cell in our body, producing energy to give our immune system more resilience? What are your thoughts on that, Jalal? I know, I'm pretty sure you'd be agreeing with that. I don't know. Tell me, what do you think?
We call that respiration inside of the mitochondria oxidative phosphorylation, and it's super, super important. There is a little bit more to breathing as well. If we start to loop in things like melanin, for instance, because when melanin is exposed to UV light, it produces oxygen, and that oxygen is used by the cell. Used by the cell for breathing. So there's potentially 4 different types of breathing. And I guess it really comes back to just the beautiful nature of this mind-body spirit complex that we are, where there's multiple kind of layers built on top of each other, and at every layer there's a type of breathing, and all of those forms of breathing have to be functional in order for there to be optimal health. And that's kind of what I see as the definition of quantum coherence. It's all cells at every layer inside of the body, whether it's a cell or the tissue or the organ, etc., all acting autonomously, but for the benefit of the individual. And in the quantum biology sphere, there are so many clinicians that are focused right on the nitty-gritty of quantum cellular function, etc., but they don't think the big picture, the structure, how the body's actually formed, and how that's absolutely critical to the fascial system and the communication of all that energy and information throughout the body. So I think that's another step forward just in for all the quantum biologists, if there are any that are listening, that you have to have this craniosacral mechanism operating optimally, because it forms that optimal pumping of the cerebrospinal fluid down the spine back up into the brain. And I would argue the most important quantum fluid inside of the body is the cerebrospinal fluid.
Interesting.
What about all the other different respirations, Ron? Because even in osteopathy, we talk about that every single joint has its own ebb and flow of respiration. So, like, we can make it simple and profound at the same time. A.T. Still said this: life is motion. It's one of the essays we have to write in osteo school. Please write a 2,000 words on life is motion. What does that mean? You do it in first year, but maybe in first year you don't realise how profound that is, because what about emotional rhythms? What about tide rhythms, water rhythms? What about hormonal rhythms, like hormonal respiration? Like, we could go into the anatomy of all those things. They're all present. So this whole thing of life is motion is actually quite a profound statement. So it's really, for me, that's like the summation of, you could break it down into all the different respirations, but the sum of the parts is the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts, really, is what's encapsulated with that. And that the more vitality you have, so, you could say, well, that's like getting your psychology right, it's getting your sun exposure right, it's getting your water right, getting your food right. Depends which book you read. If you're quantum biology, if you read Reston A. Price, if you go and see a spiritual healer, it's like you got your chakras right. But all those things are important. You go see the breathing coach and you Wim Hof or whatever it is, like, all those things are important. And that coherence around that motion, the coherence of the motion and all those rhythms and fluctuations and frequencies is the key. And you can feel that, and you can sense that, and you can palpate that in someone who has vitality, Like, we joked about your age before, and I'm not trying to be like a suck, but like, you have extraordinary vitality, right? Like, 40 years of dental practice should wear most people out, right? And running big clinics and all that sort of stuff. And here you are, like, pumping out health coaching. You know what I mean? It's just awesome. And that's how it should be. That's how we should be, right? And so what we're really wanting to do is take kids that aren't thriving, particularly like kids that are close to my heart in this, because I went through this. I didn't thrive as a kid properly, so I didn't have that vitality that I wanted. So as an adult, I was kind of behind the eight ball, but not anymore. But that's what I'm really passionate about: getting life and motion coherent, so that that way you just grow. Like, the teeth just become beautiful, the skin becomes beautiful, the desk naturally just go, oh, I don't want to eat that. Like my son just goes like, ooh, like, yuck, I wouldn't want to eat that.
How old is he?
13. Like,
13,
yeah. If you gave him a can of Coke, he'd be like, no thanks.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool. That's good. Look, I mean, I think part of the problem is that we are so far removed from what nature had intended.
Exactly.
And I think there is no greater, well, that's arguable. I shouldn't make a statement like that. But our relationship with the sun and the earth are where it really hits home. And I mean, I go down the beach a lot, and I'm often down there with my grandchildren, which are running around, with a very brief swimming costume on and in the sun. And yet right next to them will be kids that have got hats on, ankle to neck, what do they call them? Swim costumes, rash to, because we have to, according to the public health authorities, protect our kids and ourselves from this terrible thing called the sun, which has given life to Earth, but people don't seem to find that ironic in any way. And yet this thing here, and I'm holding up a phone, no problem at all, pumping out stuff. This is part of the problem,
it's
isn't
an
it?
irony, isn't it? I mean,
it's a shocking
walk
irony.
around fearing the sun, and I don't think it is too bad of a step to say, yeah, the sun and the earth gives us life. Like, hello. Like, how do you think your food got here, whether it's animal, vegetable, mineral? It came from the sun and the earth. So it's like it's we're lost in that. Like I think like people that walk around like literally banging into each other because they're peering at this damn phone.
Yeah. Yes. But well, Jalal, I mean, we did talk about this last time you were on, but again, I just don't think people could hear it often enough from a quantum perspective to at least lay down some foundations to, improve your health rather than fight things. What would be your recommendations as a quantum biologist for people to engage with?
It's a really, really great question. Some of these basic things that one can do, and Cole and I frequently have this conversation with the children in the Quantum Kid Clinic, and we talk to them about. I guess the number one thing would be trying to increase morning sun exposure, something as simple as that, to help program those rhythms inside of the body, the circadian rhythm, the hormonal rhythms, all these types of things. Because once we get sunlight into the eyes, without any glasses, without any contacts, without any sunglasses, so naked eyes, we expose our eyes to the sun in the morning, sometime between sunrise to about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be great for the kids and as well as the parents to optimize those rhythms. The second thing is blocking blue light exposure, and so that means devices either need to have the orange green setting on their computers or their phones, which is like what I've got at the moment. I'm sure both of you have as well, and we also have that conversation with them about things like EMFs. So, it's better to watch TV than to hold an iPad in your hand. It's better to have the Wi-Fi off while you're sleeping as opposed to sleeping with the Wi-Fi on. So morning sun exposure, blocking blue light, just getting outside in the backyard and just having your feet on the ground and just grounding, earthing. And that serves two purposes. It's kind of like you're uploading electrons from the earth, but you're also dissipating any of the man-made electromagnetic frequencies that your body's accumulated throughout the day, and you're dissipating that into the earth. So it's like a good way to offload or excrete things that have been built up. And so, I mean, those are some of the lifestyle discussions that Cole and I have with children and parents. And we are pretty passionate about having the parents understand the quantum approach. And so we almost have what we could call a parent agreement, Cole, isn't it? Where we have the patients and the children and their parents understand that there's a commitment here. There's a commitment from us as clinicians, but there's also a commitment from the children to be compliant. There's a commitment from the parents to create an environment where it's easier for the child to be compliant. And so the process works three ways. And once all three are working cohesively, we get really great results. But I mean, we've had fantastic results in children being able to sleep better, fall asleep faster with some of these light changes. But at the same time, there's a lot of children that will struggle to fall asleep or play up a little bit before they go to sleep. And a lot of the time it's because it's hard for them to breathe while they're sleeping. So it's literally a stressful experience for them. And so once we can make the act of breathing simpler for them, once we can improve their relationship with the atmosphere, all of a sudden sleep is something that they actually look forward to. And it's no longer a stressful experience. And that means a reduction in sympathetic tone. That means an increase in parasympathetics. That means potentially they're no longer bedwetting, plus some cranial osteopathy to help with that. And it's just so gratifying to see these changes. And it happens really quickly. I mean, the children's ability to heal, we see drastic changes in 3 or 4 months, even
nice.
inside of 1 month sometimes, Cole, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, we were just talking earlier this week about one patient who Cole reviewed literally 3.5 weeks later after his first appointment. And it was just massive wholesale changes from when we started with him.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, let's focus in on a case like that, and without mentioning names, of course, but what was some of these symptoms and the things, the presenting, and what were the change you observed?
Wow, better behaviour. This is just going off the mum. Better behaviour in the afternoons. Those sleep-deprived people will get crabby in the afternoon. He didn't fall asleep in the car like he normally did. He could hold his breath underwater. He was keeping up with his older brother more and not getting exhausted. His behaviour was more focused, more clear, not as angry, not as reactive. That was in 3 weeks. It's just she kept listing the things. She's like, yeah, nothing really changed. And then she just said, oh, but this happened. Oh, but this happened. Oh, and he's better at this. And he holds his breath longer. Would that be something to do with it? I'm like, yeah, only 100%. Yeah.
And I mean, there are other symptoms as well. We deal a lot with children that are struggling with nocturnal enuresis or bedwetting. And a lot of the time that's just a vagal tone story. And the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve that exits the skull through the jugular foramen just here. And so once Cole's able to release the bones that are constricting that, no longer is the garden hose kinked.
Yeah, plus using the appliance to maintain that. That's the key, right? That's what we didn't say before, is that the dentist becomes the osteopath. Jalal did say that, but that's because when you get it right in the mouth, it does my job for me. I'm redundant then. That's the coolest part. So we can use the dental appliances we use to hold the change. And that's just they're getting cranial osteopathy overnight. It's just a win, you know. When you get that relationship right, and you use we tend to use these softer appliances, but they've got just enough spring to create this change in the skull, and that's where you get the incredible results from.
Can I get a little bit into the nitty gritty of how that works? So in each foot we have an arch, and that arch is serving multiple purposes. So when your foot presses against the floor, you can't beat the floor. Your foot doesn't fall in through the earth. And so the purpose of the arch is to absorb the force of the earth up against the foot. So force absorption is one purpose. Then it's also distributing that force throughout your entire body, your entire musculoskeletal system. So force distribution is the second purpose. And then the third thing is, of course, just load bearing, because the arches of our feet are carrying our entire body. But the fourth thing, which is a big revelation for me, is this concept of the spring. So when we are running and our arch hits the floor, it allows us to spring forward off that foot in order to then land our left foot on the floor. And then that same process happens. So the arch kind of compresses against the floor and then springs forward. So Ron, as a dentist, can you think of another place in the body where there might be an arch?
I can actually. Funnily enough, there's 2 arches.
There's 2 arches.
Two arches in the mouth.
2 arches in the mouth. And did you know that both of those arches are covered in a specific material called enamel, which is super, super hard? So once those arches come together, it's kind of like a closed loop system again. They can't bite through each other. There's a stopping point. And so that leads to force absorption, force distribution throughout the entire cranium, as well as that same spring mechanism that happens with the feet on the earth. And the spring mechanism is an amplification of the movement of the cranial bones when the child or the adult is biting into the appliances that we're using. And so that is the big revelation. It's that, in Cole's own words, he might work on a patient and see them once a week or once a fortnight for 6 months and gradually and slowly be able to create changes in their cranium. Or he could see the patient, I could deliver a dental appliance which is appropriate for the patient, and then he might see them 2 or 3 more times, and he's achieved the same results as he would with 24 appointments over 6 months.
Yeah. But yeah, go on. But Janelle, I've often thought that, this is what I love about the fact that you're collaborating, because, chiros, osteos, well, less so physios, will do a manipulation to improve alignment of the spine. And then the patient leaves their office and bites together with these hard structures called teeth, which will perpetuate any imbalance. And boom, things go out of balance and they're back again a week or 2 later, which is a great business model. I don't deny that. It's a great business model. And as you say, 24 adjustments, do the maths on that. But this is what I like about why dentists should be collaborating with body workers, and body workers should be collaborating with dentists who know what they are doing. That's a big if, who understand what they're doing, because a lot of dentists will just fit a piece of plastic in a person's mouth and think that's all there is to it. And it's not.
100%. Like there's dental splints and then there's dental splints, aren't there? Like there's upper splints and there's lower splints. I'm personally not a fan of upper splints, and that's because if you look at the way the skull is arranged, the upper jaw is actually got a suture right down the middle. So it's actually in 2 halves. And so if we have a splint which is locking up both halves of that upper jaw, it's actually going to impact the way that cranium is breathing, that primary respiratory motion. So dentists need to know what they're doing. They need to know the theory. They need to unlearn and relearn. They need to be using the right appliances for the right instances, for the right clinical presentations, and they need to be working with body workers who are willing to learn more about parts of the body that they know nothing about, which is namely the mouth. And we're just going to get way, way better results. I think much like there's a lot of traditional medicine which is stuck in their own, a lot of specialists are stuck in their own silos. I think even in allied health, it's the same as well. And we definitely need to do better.
Well, Jalal, on that note, we will finish and have links, of course, to the Quantum Kid Clinic in North Sydney and the wonderful work that you're both doing. And again, thank you for joining us. And I will thank Cole in an email after this episode. Thanks so much.
That's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having us, Ron.
I find this conversation so interesting and inspiring, and a couple of things that are worth repeating, and that is the head is made up, the skull is made up of 22 bones, and those bones, when we talk about the movement of those bones, it may be semantics, but it's about flexion and strains which occur and cause imbalances in our neurology. Both our peripheral neurology, that is the nerves that if I lift my hand up, that's the peripheral nervous system sending a message from my brain down my spine to my muscles, and that moves my arm. That's called the peripheral nervous system. And also the autonomic nervous system, that part of our nervous system that performs all kinds of automatic functions. And the functioning of the nervous system is a very important part, obviously, of keeping us healthy and well. So the cranial bones have nerves which emerge from them. They're called cranial nerves, and they pass through little holes or foramen in the bone, in the skull. And if there are strains on the bones, then that can impinge on optimal nerve function. So that's one thing. The other thing is that every vertebrae in the spine has 3 facets, the disc and the facets called transverse facets, and that's what gives that tripodization or stability to our vertebrae, apart from one vertebrae, and that is the first cervical vertebrae, or called C1, and that only has 2 facets, and the third facet is the lower jaw, which gives it stability. So if your lower jaw is out of balance, then imbalances can occur throughout the body and throughout the cranium. There's a whole story there about optimal breathing, and I thought that was interesting. I think it's also worth mentioning that the lower half of the face, that is your upper and lower jaws, your cheeks, your tongue, your lips, occupy about 30 to 40% of the sensory nerves in your body. So this is an incredibly sensitive part of the body, and you know that instinctively if you've ever been to the barber or the hairdresser and you've been talking and a hair drops into your mouth, you immediately know where that hair is because there are so many nerves in your mouth to tell you. Now, if I put that hair on any part of your body or if I put it under your feet, you would not be able to tell me which or where that hair was because there just simply aren't enough nerves to tell you that. So this is an incredibly sensitive part of the body, which also helps stabilize the first cervical vertebrae and is subject to a whole range of issues around breathing and nutrition and environmental issues. So wonderful story there about collaboration and learning from two wonderful practitioners. We will, of course, have links to their websites, both their websites. And, I think it is a wonderful collaboration that we should see a whole lot more of in the professions. And the interesting one also is about quantum biology. I find this so interesting. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics is very, very complicated. And so it's very easy for medical practitioners or health practitioners who, many of which I would venture to say have very healthy egos. If they don't understand something, then it's not worth understanding. And that simply isn't the case. Quantum biology is what is going on in each and every cell in your body and ensuring that energy is delivered to the various systems to ensure they function optimally. And if that energy is not delivered and instead is interrupted with the blue lights, for example, from our phones, from our devices, from our TVs, from our LED lights that are in almost every house now, and we are at the same time being warned about the terrible dangers of sunlight, then I just think that is another one of those public health messages which is part of a wonderful economic model, just not a very good health model. There are many, many public health messages that we should be questioning, and that's another thing that I find most inspiring about the work of Dr. Jalal Khan. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well.
This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.